there is still something to be said about the role that technology plays in looking at art, whether or not we are using the technology to make the art. We have the possibility of using our technology to think about art in different ways. And whether or not the art is being inspired by the technology is a different issue, as we mentioned on Monday during the last PowerPoint. This excerpt here by Claude Lévi-Strauss, traveling to the Amazonian forest, shows us a little bit more about the thought process of these early anthropologists, early 20th century. It is unnecessary to point out that the Nambikwara have no written language, but they do not know how to draw either, apart from making a few dotted lines and zigzags on their cords. And again, right, we have that aspect of indigenous folks not being particularly gifted at doing things, and kind of a little bit of a judgy attitude here from Levi Strauss. Nevertheless, as I had done with the Keduveo, I handed out sheets of paper and pencils. At first, they did nothing with them, and one day I saw that they were all busy drawing wavy horizontal lines. I wonder what they were trying to do. Then it was suddenly borne upon me that they were writing, or to be more accurate, they were trying to use their pencils in the same way as I did mine, which was the only way they could conceive of, because I had not yet tried to amuse them with my drawings. The majority did this and no more, but the chief had further ambitions. No doubt he was the only one who had grasped the purpose of writing. So he asked me for a writing pad, and when we both had one and we were working together, if I asked for information on a given point, he did not supply it verbally, but drew wavy lines on his paper and presented them to me, as if I could read his reply. He was half taken in by his own make-believe. Each time he completed a line, he examined it anxiously, as if expecting the meaning to leave from the page, and the same look of disappointment came over his face. So this is kind of an interesting thought experiment, if you will. What would you do if you did not know what drawing was, if you did not know what a pencil was or a paper was? What would you do with it? And more importantly, in the context of this week's lectures, would it be considered art? In this case, Levi-Strauss starts from the predicate that this indigenous tribe did not have art besides drawing on their gourds, which is, kind of like putting stickers on your water bottle these days. Well, the Amazonian people were doing this as well, but that did not classify as art. Now, we can agree or disagree on whether or not it is, but that is besides the point for us right now. More importantly is the fact that once you give people a general understanding of what a pen and pencil does, well, they will find a way to do this, however elementary it is. And the average human will spend quite a bit of time learning how to write. And of course, this is not something that comes naturally, nor should it be, because the forms of the letters are invented, and therefore, unless you are told exactly what writing is, there is no reason why you would magically figure out what writing is. But the more important part here in Levi-Strauss's analysis is that there is very much this understanding that it could convey a certain meaning, that you are able, using those tools, using that technology, to replicate a form, and that form might mean something. In this case, literally means something, although it was probably seen by these the people that he's working with, these Nembikor. It could have been seen also as a form of art or as a representation of a larger idea that they had. But, let's set that aside once again. The fact of the matter is that once the chief tries it and cannot convey his meaning through the lines the same way that Levi-Strauss does, he is disappointed. And we are here not so far from the more general forms of art that Boaz was trying to figure out. If the art of writing has anything to do with a natural form, then they should be able to do this naturally, although that is not the case. Perhaps using the aesthetic version of a line and making a very nicely wavy, nicely curly line, then you might have the better sense of how artistic your writing is. But again, this is not the case either. And what about the technical aspect? The technical aspect of writing using piece of paper. Obviously, just having a piece of paper and a pen does not give you the magical ability to write. So there is something a little bit more a little bit deeper than just the tools, just the aesthetics, just the history of what nature has done for us. And as I mentioned before, the larger aspect of Boas finding out how to convey certain ideas through certain meanings, through certain shapes. And again, my PowerPoint is not working. This is turning to be a pattern. Maybe it's a form of art. Is that once you travel around the world enough, you may be able to find different forms of art that look more or less the same, similar enough anyway, for people to start to ask themselves the question, well, was this done in a intentional manner, or is it just a function of people having similar ideas at more or less the same time? Um, I'm going to try to reconnect this as I talk. Um, Finding different forms of art that look more or less the same in different parts of the world would kind of go towards this idea that people have some kind of elementary brain process, if you will, that gives you um, the the impetus to write, to represent things, to see things as they are or as you see them from the point of view of your culture, of your people. Now, of course, there's a much larger context behind this of the technology and everything else, but the idea that is agitating us right now is the idea that people might be enticed, again, can be uh, uh, inspired, because we are talking about art, inspired to create things that are more or less similar to one another for different reasons. And, in the grand terms of how science works, that different people have had the same ideas over the years, and those things have materialized in different ways. Some of it is partly the luck of the draw. Some of it is probably a matter of great minds thinking alike. So, being able to think more or less alike for a variety of people would allow the variety of people to create forms of art that we will later, or at a later date anyway, be able to identify as art. Let me see if I can load this thing now. Identifying our artistic forms in the sense of, like this, for example, there's a statue of a seated man and the statue of a seated man, both of them done in the same year, both of them in different shapes, different forms in different parts of the world, slightly different, but yet close enough that they were identified by the same plain name by different anthropologists, would give us an idea of how the world has evolved to create these representations. Now, what is the meaning of this representation in a more general sense? Why did two different groups of people decide to represent two different kinds of sitting people across the world? This is another different issue that we have no time to deal with at this point, but a question worth asking. So, the um, the secondary aspect of that leads us back to Boas, if I'm able to reconnect my PowerPoint. That leads us back to Boas is the aspect of, hey, now it's showing up, is the aspect of the development of decorative science, as he points out here. It would seem that the development of decorative designs cannot simply be interpreted by the assumption of a general tendency towards conventionalism, or by the theory of an evolution of technical motives into realistic motives by a process of reading in, but that a considerable number of other psychic processes must be taken into consideration if we desire to obtain a clear insight onto the history of art. So it is not simply a matter of mental processes, of technical processes, of even aesthetic sense. It is much largely a matter of a global, perhaps, if you will, anthropological view of people. And anthropology has been able to use the technology at its disposal to make us a little bit better aware of how life works before our time. This GIF here is an excerpt from Nanook of the North by Robert Flaherty, probably one of the best known movies that he did, and one of the earliest documents that we have of Arctic peoples. Again, 1922, he started filming things in the 1910s. And his view was to document the quote unquote traditional Inuit ways of life. And of course, he did make some artistic choices in the context, and that's something that we are rediscovering now in the modern time. But having this firsthand experience of what the Arctic Circle would have looked like literally 100 years ago is a pretty remarkable achievement of anthropology. And today, this kind of multimedia work is something that we tend to call visual anthropology because there are just no words that could convey exactly what a trip through the Arctic in 1922 could have done. Well, there are maybe words, but images are worth a thousand of those. And it has become pretty common even to start to use these techniques for understanding how other cultures' processes might work. This book here from Saul Worth in the 1970s used as a predicate the idea that different people would, by the same technical means, produce different forms of art. And so he gave Navajo Indians the technology to document their own world, give them cameras to allow them to see their world or structure their world, as he points it out here. Clearly, then, people of various kinds with major differences in culture, technological training, and formal education can use motion picture cameras. What is not as clear is what we are to say or think or feel about the resultant movies. How do we deal with these movies? Of what value are they? To whom? How shall we use them? How shall we allocate resources to produce them? There is little research in this area today, and there was none only 5 years ago. It is hoped that this study, by examining and analyzing one such project in detail, can clarify and lend impetus to the entire area of visual communication research. In a sense, it is not a study of the Navajo Indian, it is the study of how a group of people structure their view of the world, their reality, through film. In that sense, the results may be generalized. So the view of art here goes through not just the consumption of art or why people make objects, but also why they create these objects. What was the principle to make sense out of the world around their lives? And as a result of that, by different aesthetic sensibilities, different general understanding of the world, they would create different art. And this experiment was supposed to document that. So there are various ways in which these ideas may or may not come together. This movie here from the 1930s by Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson shows a trance ritual in Bali, in modern-day Indonesia. And in this context, the very documentary function of showing a group of people doing a religious ceremony will give us only some amount of understanding of what that life would have been at the time. But again, this is another invaluable document, but it may also lead us to think about how much of that is performance, because it is very much a performed ritual, and some of that may be performed in part for the anthropologist as well, which gives us the same conversation that we have had before about the observer's paradox, because as the anthropologist is there to take notes, there is the possibility of part of the picture being obscured or modified by the people who are producing these forms of art. And especially in the context of artistic performance, the performer is obviously aware that they are performing. And if they are even more aware of this performance being captured in unique ways, then you have layers upon layers of artistic performance to be found. To be found by whom exactly? Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, being anthropologists, produced anthropology for the scientific consumption. But what about the art that we are creating today? Now we have the possibility to create all kinds of forms of arts, mostly about cats, though. What does that mean about us, producers of this art, consumers of this art? What are people to think about the amount of cat content that we make on a day-to-day basis? Now, there's an anthropological study behind that, of course, and giving people the tools to create cat tape pictures willy-nilly is just the beginning of us looking at art in an anthropological way.